All right. Well, new series, new Sunday, and just such a special moment to get moments like this with Kevin. And so, sorry, I'm just a little bit wet and trying to get myself prepared today. And so, welcome all of you who are here this morning, and to those who are watching online tonight. So great that you've chosen to join us today and be with us today as we start our brand new series. And it's birthed out of this place where I'm sure you saw it in the video, but we're so good at like packing things down, right? We're not always good at unearthing things, but covering and packing things down. This phrase, I'm fine. It's like when you ask somebody a question, how you doing today? It can be, I'm fine, but also, it's good. It's good. And you can kind of see it in their eyes, right? Where you're like, I'm not so sure that you believe it's all good. Because we use it as a way to get people, right? I'm fine. We use it as a way to keep people at bay, to leave us alone. Like when we're upset or we want to avoid something, we don't want to address an issue, right? We just say, I'm fine. And it's almost as if we believe it's just going to kind of go away, right? This can lead to all sorts of problems for us, though, right? It can lead to things where we accumulate over the years. We accumulate, and we use this term, and I'm not saying it's a good one, but we talk about things like baggage. But over the years, we can accumulate these different things in our life that have affected us negatively. And if we're not careful, they become very multi-layered, multifaceted, and they become more complex, and then they affect us emotionally. And when we avoid, when we stuff down, when we lose the energy, or when we lose our way over the years, if we're not careful, it can eventually lead to places that we never intended to go. Things like resentment, bitterness, or loneliness. And this can even result in relationships that we're in. Even if we're married, we can feel distant and alone in that relationship, even if we're occupying the same space. And it seems like we're good at acknowledging our like physical hygiene, but not so good at our emotional hygiene. Like, think about it for a minute. Why do we need 18 different toothpastes? Do we need to brush our teeth 18 different ways? I mean, I go to the toothpaste aisle, and I have a hard time knowing which one to pick. Do I want my teeth whiter? Do I want my breath fresher? Is that not the point of toothpaste in the first place? But I guess not. This one has scope in it. This one fights cavities. And I'm like, wait a minute. Aren't all toothpaste supposed to fight cavities? Right? But we've spent a tremendous amount of time on our physical hygiene. So much time. As a matter of fact, over the last 200 years, humanity has doubled our life expectancy in just the last 200 years. And this has come from personal physical hygiene. Some of it is a result of vaccine. I'm just going to park that one for a moment. But what has happened is we've learned how to fight disease. We learned how to fight disease and prolong our lifespan. And as a result, the quality of our life. But we're good at the physical aspect, but if anything has surfaced over the last couple of years, is we're not nearly as good with the mental or the emotional hygiene. We're good at like flossing our teeth every day, kind of good. But we struggle to take accounts of all those conversations at work that we didn't enjoy, or those things in our life that it wasn't really about that thing, it was the thing beneath that thing, but we didn't deal with that thing. And so now it's not about the thing that we were talking about, it's about the thing beneath the thing beneath the thing. But what if we could grow in our emotional intelligence? What if there was mechanisms that we could put into our daily life that could help us not just get better with our physical hygiene, but our emotional? We spend loads of time, energy, and money on our physical, but what about the emotional? Hygiene is the practice that keeps you healthy. And so how do we keep ourselves emotionally healthy? What is emotional hygiene? Well, Great question. In much the same way that dental hygiene involves us brushing our teeth or flossing, personal hygiene, emotional hygiene involves cleaning ourselves and taking care of the emotional things that have taken place, the psychological health, and adopting brief daily habits to monitor and to address psychological wounds when we sustain them. Let's ask ourselves the question, what would change in our lives if we spent as much time on our emotional health as we did on our physical hygiene? You see, as a leader in the community and in our church community, it is apparent to me that emotional health often gets put on the wayside of progress, right? We got to achieve something with our lives, right? We got to keep going. We got to hustle hard, right? And so our emotional health goes on the back of that. Or it goes on the back of our physical health. And so you know this, and this isn't shocking. None of you are going to be like, oh, I didn't know that. We only have so much time in a day. But what I want to do in this series and what we want to do for the next 3 weeks is talk about the emotional and the mental health, your mental health, to bring awareness to it so that you might live better, or at least have the tools and the resources to take your next step. As a matter of fact, and you might not enjoy this, but you would probably rather lose a tooth than your mental health, if you were to think about it. And so why don't we think about reorienting our priorities for a few weeks? Because the later we choose to deal with stuff, the greater the consequences of it. And later problems become greater problems. Now, before you feel like, oh, I see, you got those fancy boots on, you're on a stage, you're talking on a microphone, before you believe that I have it all together, I haven't always had it together. As a matter of fact, one of the pinnacles that I thought in my life would be the moment that I would be celebrated and the moment that I thought this would be the time I would find the most joy, I actually experienced the least. And it was because I had neglected this part of my life. A few years back, 7 years ago, we planted a church called Center Church. We, as in Destiny and I, and a small group of people. We went about it kind of a weird way. Instead of grabbing a huge mass of people, we were like 35. That's what we needed to launch with the one team we were part of. And so we had 35, but I think we're counting kids and youth in there as well. Maybe even some babies, or maybe even some babies to be born, right? And probably out of that core was maybe about 15 really committed people. It was a lot of work, a ton of work. About 2 years into that process, between my previous job and planting that church, I had a year off of getting paid, but then I did the work of not getting paid to plant the church. And I went back to pursue my master's full time. While Destiny, who was my beautiful wife serving in one of our kids' classrooms, I know a lot of pastors say beautiful wife. I just want to say that because I haven't seen her in the last couple of days because she was on a retreat. So I just had to, I just saw her this morning and I was like, you are beautiful. Whatever. Okay. So then 2 years go by and we're planting this church. There's a lot of stress. We go from 3 kids to 4 kids. We have a baby 2 months before we plant the church. I'm not getting paid. I still remember the final Sunday before we launched, and we gave all that we had left in our savings, and we said, God, we're all in. We had nothing left when we started in savings. And so we launched Center Church, and people showed up. That was cool. It worked. A lot of work. And I kept doing a master's degree on top of that, and I was a father of 4. And you know, it was okay for about a year. And then after a year, it kept growing and getting worse. Between Des and I, there was more tension. I was spending less time with my children, at least quality time. I was present, but my mind was always somewhere else, editing that paper. I still remember, and this is hilarious, in the final semester of my school, last course I ever took,
Guess what the course is called? Balancing Ministry and Family. And my prof, after writing a paper how bad I was balancing ministry, said, take a knee. Take a knee. From here on in, if you don't hand any more assignments in, you graduate. But you know what? My GPA was more important than my family. And it cost me. I remember walking across the platform. You get a special sash when you have a certain GPA. Wow. I wore that sash. I walked that stage. They got my last name right, which many of you still are scared to say my last name as your pastor. It's Loeve. Oh, and some of you are like, oh, thank God. I walked across the stage. I shook the president's hands. It was down in Anaheim, because if you go to school somewhere, go somewhere cool where you can go to Disneyland after. I shook the president's hand. Congratulations. I remember he called me son, and I was so upset. I'm like, son, I got a graduate degree, you know? I walked down. They said, I'd like to take your picture. I said, whatever, I don't want to take a picture. I don't want to remember this moment. Now, many of us don't want to admit moments like that. We'd rather say statements like, I'm fine, right? I'm fine. We'd rather stuff it down. We'd rather look the part. And if I may, for just a moment, specifically guys, we have a hard time with this. We want to look like we have it all together all the time. And there's got to be a point where we're willing to admit that we don't. And I would dare say that it's in the willingness to admit that it's not all okay that we find our greatest strength there. The strongest people I know are those who are willing to admit their mistakes and their weaknesses, confront them, and challenge themselves to take it head on. But the more that we delay, the more that we stuff, the more that we say, I still got time, and overlook the fact that it has affected our lives, it will affect us down the road. And it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to stay that way. It's not going to help you or make you better simply by acknowledging it, although that's a great start. But change and action, shift and change, make things better. I mean, have you ever talked yourself out of something? I've done this so many times. Things like, it's fine, when it's clearly not fine. I mean, it's not that big a deal when it's a big deal. It's not my fault. At least not, I think it's not my fault. Just don't use that one in a marriage argument. But after coming down from the platform, I came home and I had to do some big work on me. Big work. It was at that point that like every sort of help, support I could get. Leadership coach, went to a therapist, went and made sure that we did marriage counseling. We did it all because I knew that it wasn't okay. And it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to stay that way. And so we've been in a process of a healing journey, trying to find our footing, and now I get to lead a church and enjoy it. And, you know, it has its challenges and its stresses, like everything does. But you know what? There's something different that we found. And although there's still challenges, big ones, that there is things that we can do in our lives to acknowledge and to move forward that can help us. And it starts with what Jesus invites us to in the middle of a book in Matthew. The book of Matthew is kind of fascinating to me because it was written by a Jewish person to the Jewish community. Now, you might be sitting here and you're like, well, how does that then apply to me? I may be Jewish, I may not be, but how does this apply to me 2,000 years later? And what I love about this is that what the writer was trying to get at, and the reason he was writing it specifically to Jews was because he was Jewish and he wanted to show who Jesus was, but he writes it in such a way that the book is going to unpack that Jesus is a greater Moses. Now, Moses, in the tradition of the Jewish faith, would have been like the hero of the faith. I mean, Moses led the people out of Israel. He threw a stick down, it turned into a snake. He had a burning bush experience. I mean, Moses had so many incredible things happen in his life, but ultimately he led people to freedom. And so the writer of Matthew is trying to illuminate Jesus, not just bringing one group of people to freedom one time in one part of history. But what the writer of Matthew is trying to do is say, Jesus came as a rescuer, not just for one portion of history to one group of people, but for all time. And so, similarly, in Moses' life, there's 5 big sections of his life. So too, the book has 5 big sections to it. About halfway through the book, in a bit of an obscure place, Jesus says words and invites us into an experience unlike no other. And this is our starting place. When we're thinking about emotional hygiene, when we're thinking about where do we start, where do we begin, we got things going on in our life, how do we take the next step? Jesus invites us into something. And the reason the writer of Matthew is doing this is for stories like Kevin's, where we face big challenges in our life. We might face big doubt. We might face situations that we don't know how to navigate. But that there's somebody that's inviting us to a different experience, and not just inviting us into something, but inviting us into a partnership. And so we find these words in Matthew 11, verse 28. Up on the screen, you're going to see these words, and Jesus invites us into an experience. This is what he says. He says, "Come to me." What I find fascinating about Jesus is there are so many different parts of the Old Testament that speak about him coming, and that people have anticipated that he's coming. And you'd think, like the Jewish people thought, that he was going to come like a king, that he was going to take over the Roman occupation of the time, that he was going to displace all these Romans, and that Israel would rise in its power again, and that they would be a king, and he would be born to a king, or born through a queen, right? But he would rise in power, and he'd probably have a lot of, he'd have power, but he'd also have resources. He'd have money to be able to make change. I mean, this would just make sense that God would pick someone famous that could just come and say, we're going to go and already have established power. But Jesus is more subversive than that. And then he invites us into that life. He doesn't demand it. Look at this. Come to me, all. But I don't know what I believe yet. All. I don't have my life all together yet. All. I mean, I've barely even gone to church. All. Come to me, all who are what? Weary and burdened. All those that say, it's fine, when it's not fine. All those that feel the weight, that feel the pressure. Jesus invites us in to a new way. Now, just for a moment, there has to be acknowledgement that we're like weary and burdened. It's a response to an invitation, but unless we recognize that there's something in our life that needs to shift, it's hard to accept that invitation. You see, he invites, he doesn't demand. And then he leads us into a different way. But you can't get to where you want to be until you know exactly where you are. So where are you? Is there weariness? Is there burden? Jesus invites to come. You see, pain gets our attention, doesn't it? It allows us to see our failings. Like when I thought I could hit this jump the other week on my snowboard, and I clearly couldn't, pain told me, you didn't do it well. But pain gets our attention. It allows us to see our failings for what they really are and the danger they pose to our souls. Self-reflection is the skill of taking yourself apart every day, not tearing yourself down, but of taking those pieces of your life apart to see them as they truly are. It's the difference between self-care and self-centeredness. You see, self-centeredness is it's all about me, I just need more. Self-care is to look and say, is there parts of my life that need improvement? Do you know where you are emotionally? If we're honest with ourselves, some of us are too arrogant to ask the questions, others too busy, others too scared or fearful of the outcomes, or still others maybe simply unaware of what's going on. But you know this as well as I do, that the arrogant don't ask questions. The humble do. Because when we're arrogant, we already know everything. But humility tells us something different. And to have some hard news, but it's also good news. There's no rest for the arrogant. There is rest for the humble. And emotions are messengers. They tell us what we're feeling, why I'm feeling it. They help us recognize what's happening in our life and bring awareness to it. Emotional hygiene is this: recognizing what I'm feeling and knowing what to do with that feeling. Why on earth am I having this experience? Maybe you were told that the feelings, men, were not masculine. And so you just deflected. And I know, women, you feel as well. And I know when I start saying men and women that can do all sorts of stuff, but this seems to be a blocker for many people like myself. You might even need to learn a new vocabulary for specific emotions. Because when adults lack an emotional vocabulary, they also typically lack the skills to regulate themselves in moments of elevated emotion. So what are you feeling? And what should you do with that feeling? What should you do with it? Well, Jesus invites us into this. This is what he says next in verse 28. He says this: "Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened." And I love this part. "And I will give you rest." Does that not sound good? When I think about Ukraine, when I think about the division in our nation, when I think about all the vaccine conversations, when I think about mandates, and when I think about travel, and when I think about gas prices, and when I think about on and on, does rest not sound good? And he invites us into it. And we all have the opportunity to respond to the invitation, but he invites us in. But he changes the script a little bit, because we'd think, Jesus, you take it, Carrie Underwood, Jesus, take the wheel, and I'm just going to let you deal with it, and I'm going to go my own way. But this is what Jesus says in verse 29. He does not say, take the wheel. This is what he says: take my yoke upon you. That sounds heavy. And learn from me. For I am gentle, and what's the word? Humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Look at the next verse. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And for many of us, we don't even understand what this yoke is, but it sounds heavy. And this is what it is. A yoke was something that was placed between two oxen. Now they would both carry the load together. And why I said it wasn't just Jesus take the wheel is that God invites us into something, and Jesus invites us into a partnership. And he's saying, I'm going to carry the weight with you. You want to learn? I'm here to carry the weight with you. I'm here to take the next step with you. I'm here to lock arms and move forward together. I'll teach you how to walk. I'll teach you how to carry the weight. I'll teach you how to find rest. I'll teach you how to take the next step. I'll teach you how to manage those emotions. I'll teach you what it looks like to find peace when you haven't had peace. I will teach you if you come to me. Now, we joke about this in pop culture. Oh, it's the come to Jesus moment, and everyone laughs. We almost mock a way out. And yet, it's an opportunity. And over the next 2 weeks, we're going to talk about how we unpack that more. But today it starts with Jesus. It starts with an invitation to come for those who are weary. For those of you that feel like you can't carry the weight. For those of you like, I don't know how to unpack the emotions yet. Jesus says, hey, I'm going to teach you. I'm going to come alongside. And it's not that you're not going to have to do any work. You're still going to have to learn. You're still going to have to educate yourself. You're still going to have to take some next steps. You're still going to have to get into a small group and go regularly, even when you don't feel like it. You're still going to have to live for people beyond yourself. You're still going to have to look at those dark places, those shadow part of yourself that you don't want to see. But I'm there with you. This is the incredible invitation of Jesus that he offers all of us. So today, all around this room, are you weary? Are you burdened? Jesus offers you rest. Let's pray. God, I thank you that you are good. I thank you that you don't leave us where we're at, but you call us into a new and a better future. God, we all want things to be better. We don't always know how to get there. For those that are weary and burdened today, God, as they accept your invitation to walk with you, that they find peace, that they'd find rest for their souls. For your yoke is easy and your burden is light. God, thank you that as we start a new series about unpacking some of this emotional stuff in our life, that God, you help us to process it. Teach us to live well in community and to be authentic to ourselves and the world around us. Teach us, Jesus, how to live. Amen. Well, I am very excited for the next 2 weeks. Clay will be with us next week here on screen. And so we're very excited to talk about this idea of emotional hygiene in the next couple weeks. I want to encourage you to come back. It's going to be a phenomenal Sunday next week as we continue this series. I hope you have an amazing Sunday. Hey, hang around, say hi to somebody, and we'll see you back next week. Bring somebody with you. God bless you.